Hello there. This is the second episode in a two-part review of Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. The conversation picks up directly from the last episode, but here we focus primarily on the various interpretations and, specifically, the ending of the game. It should be noted that this was recorded right before the September release of The Phantom Pain, so the three of us are gloriously unaware of the events that will unfold in that game. Our wild speculations and theories are included here for your amusement. Thank you very much for listening. All right, so this leads us to the meat of the episode. This is going to be fun or mind-melting, depending on your opinion. But we're going to talk about what the fuck just happened. What did we watch? Well, that whole ending thing. I mean, codex, game breaking. Was that ending real at all? One thing I would like to point out, too, is that when we were saying earlier that Raiden is almost like a perfect approximation of the player, how funny is it that that's not true at all? He ends up being a fucking bloodthirsty murderer. He was a childhood soldier who got the name Jack the Ripper. And so it's like he's not this pure white thing that we can project our personalities onto, because he's the exact opposite. And one of the things that I would like to touch on is there's a lot of similarities between the game and Total Recall. We were talking about that in one of the episodes. And the thing I would like to point out is that the story of Total Recall is that there's this guy, it's in the future, and there's recall trips, which means that you can go to a company that implants memories in your head and you feel like you actually experienced an experience, like, you know, you went on a vacation or you went on a super agent mission. And that's what happens to Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie. He goes and he thinks he's going to have a secret mission implanted in his head as a vacation. And then the movie turns into an action movie and it gets really complicated where you can't figure out, is he actually in an action movie or is it the memories that were implanted in him that he paid for? I feel like Metal Gear Solid 2 covers a lot of the same ground, because in that movie, halfway through the movie, you find out that Arnold Schwarzenegger actually was a secret agent all along. And he wasn't a good secret agent. He was actually working for the bad guys. And so there's this point in the movie where he's actually fighting against his own personality. He's trying to overcome his past and redefine himself as a hero. And you have to question, is this really happening or is this his fantasy? Is he living a virtual reality fantasy? And like, isn't that exactly what happens to Raiden? You find out that he was a bloodthirsty killer, child soldier. He's not this pure white rookie. He's actually more ruthless than Snake ever was. He has more in common with Solidus than he does with Snake.
Right.
And then at the end of the game, he's forced to reevaluate himself. And I think that's just really interesting. And I think that I'm using that as a segue because one of the more popular recent interpretations of the game, and, well, depending on who you talk to, but Josh, I believe that your prominent opinion is that most of what we see in the game is not actual reality.
Yeah. It's tough because like I said, it's a complicated interpretation. And so in order to fully... you'd have to walk through everything in the game and determine whether it was real or if it was VR, or like try to find holes in why it wouldn't be VR.
I feel like you did a pretty good job of doing that while we were playing it, though. Like you would point out like, this just supports my theory, and we have to go like, you're right. I mean, like, you can't explain that as being realistic otherwise.
I guess I haven't fully walked through it myself and tried to really analyze it in that way. I've read a lot, like Super Bunny Hop. I've watched his videos on it, and I'm blanking on his name.
Oh, James Clinton Howell.
Yeah, James Clinton Howell. I've read his pieces on Metal Gear Solid 2, and I've watched his videos, and I still haven't quite worked through it all myself. But yeah, I feel like the game is almost all VR, if not everything is VR, including the tanker mission. The tanker mission specifically being like you're Raiden playing Snake during the tanker mission, because there's a point where Snake says...
he says that's not how it happened at all.
Right, that's not how it happened at all.
Yeah. And
then you get to see scenes that didn't actually happen in the tanker when you played it.
So just because this is a summary episode and we're wrapping up, you've said throughout watching the game that you think it's VR. Could you just... I'm not asking you to lay it all on the line. Just very briefly, like... This is exactly what I think is happening. Now, are you saying that like the whole game is like Raiden in sort of like a Matrix style pod where these things are being pumped into his brain, or is he being image trained as a soldier? Like what do you mean when you say it's VR?
Yeah, I don't I don't quite know. Like I said,
that's where it's kind of weird. Yeah.
I haven't walked through, like, how do I explain the fight on top of Federal Hall and then the subsequent scene where he's talking to Snake and then Rose shows up.
Well, that's like VR. It could still very easily be VR.
Right, but why would that exist as VR, I guess?
Well,
I haven't walked through it.
We brought this up in a previous episode where the closest comparison next to Total Recall would be The Matrix. And there's a very strong fan theory out there that you never see anything that's not The Matrix. So even when Neo is on the ship and it's all drab and gray,
right, it's all accounted for.
That's just a deeper level of The Matrix to keep him satisfied. And we're going to get into this later too, very soon. I think that ending is, you can definitely say that it's just a part of the VR. I mean, why else would Rose show up?
The more I think about it,
also Vamp in the background too.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I just want to go with Kojima's message at the end.
Yeah,
which was like,
it's up to you.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's up to you.
Like, is it real? Was it not real? It doesn't matter. What happened to you and what you just played was real for you, and that's all that matters.
So I think even though you subscribe mostly to the VR theory, I think our interpretations of the games really complement each other, because I think that's true. It's absolutely right. My interpretation of the game, and I'm going to save it for a little bit later because it's going to spiral a lot of conversation. My interpretation of the game is that at the end of the day, it's just Kojima's message. That's the only thing that's all it is. It's just a message to us.
It's a vehicle.
It's a vehicle for him to impart a message, because he thought it was going to be his last he always says that. Yeah. He thought it was going to be his last Metal Gear game. So I'm going to park that just real briefly, just to wrap up the VR thing, because it's going to come up again, because it's still going to rear its head. But just to wrap it up, in your analysis of that as being a VR, the whole game is VR, none of it's real. How do you account for the rest of the series? Now, just to help you out a little bit, there is a really strong fan theory that everything after Metal Gear Solid 1 is more VR.
Yeah, I haven't heard that theory, but my accounting for the rest is that Metal Gear Solid 3 is fine because it takes place in the past.
It's a prequel.
Metal Gear Solid 4 wasn't ever supposed to happen. And then Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker is also in the past, and so is Ground Zeroes, and so is the Phantom Pain. So all those take care of themselves. The only standout is Metal Gear Solid 4, and considering Kojima thought this would be his last game, and he was tying it all up with a nice, neat bow of, like, it doesn't matter, don't stop thinking about it so much, that Metal Gear Solid 4 shouldn't have existed. So I don't feel like I have to account for that. I feel like he took everything into, because people didn't get the message initially, and made it real when it didn't need to be real.
What Metal Gear Solid 4 is you said this before, Dora, that Metal Gear Solid 4 is basically just fan service. Just a long fan service. So I think that would support your it wasn't ever supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't know what that was born out of. I mean, the game itself feels pretty fucking depressing to play, and the tone of it is very depressing. And I don't know if it was him, like, well, you didn't get the message, so fuck it, here's another Metal Gear.
We're going to come back to that, Josh. That's a good point. We're going to talk about Metal Gear Solid 4 in a little bit. One of the things that we had talked about, Josh, you and I, and this is way back before this show, our Metal Gear year was even a glint in our eyes. We had a conversation, and one of the things that we had talked about is that the idea that the Metal Gear Solid series is kind of like the James Bond series, that they aren't necessarily in the same continuity. Like, one movie doesn't affect the other. Like, there's a shared history, but there's never continuity in the sense that, like, if James Bond was a real person, he would have killed fucking countries. You know, he would have so much blood on his hand. He was responsible for so many people's deaths. Also, he would be like 80 years old. Like, you can't, you just have to accept that it's a franchise and it's a series that's loosely tied together, but you have to take each episode for what it is.
That kind of lines up with Kojima did an interview on the Phantom Pain back when it was, like, first announced.
When it was still like under Moby Dick Studios.
When we hadn't seen much of Ground Zeroes at that point.
Yeah. Man, what a time that was.
I think it was Jeff Keighley that asked him about it. And he said that he's not really concerned with keeping things completely consistent, that he'll change things if he needs to in order to make the game he wants to make.
Yeah.
And so that comes into play with the fact that in Phantom Pain, if you want to translate Russian, you actually have to find a Russian translator.
Yeah.
But Big Boss spoke perfect Russian. And so they explain that away as the shrapnel in his head caused the problem. But I feel like that was more of his, like, well, I want this game mechanic to exist, and so I don't care if it doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, that supports that theory of like, it's kind of like James Bond. Like he just makes Metal Gear games and that's that.
Yeah, he figures it out after the fact. He knows the story he wants to tell,
and I'm
then
okay
he makes
with
it work. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty cool interpretation of that. One thing that we should address too, and we got some comments in the comment section when we started going off about the VR theory, is that some people were like, "What if these things just happen? Why does it have to be fake? I mean, it's a cool message, but what if it is what it is? It's a story that happens. It's self-contained."
I would say all the physics defying stuff.
Yeah.
So you'd have to set that aside.
Right.
Like, yeah, all the crazy physics stuff, a fucking vampire. As Raiden says, like there's a fucking vampire in the game. What the hell?
The thing is that when I played it, and I played it as an adult, I never took it to be that these things are really happening. Like I latched onto the idea that there's something about it that's not, like, it's more to it than it seems. Like, I never really was like, maybe these things really happened. Like, Raiden is a real character in the franchise, but maybe, like, these things didn't happen. Like, I always got that impression that, like, we're not seeing the full story. This is sort of like something's monkeying with our vision of when Raiden misremembers the tanker section. Mm-hmm. I always felt like there's a level of that. Like, now I have a different opinion about the game, but when I played it for the first time, my initial knee-jerk reaction was just like, these things really happened-ish. You know what I mean? Like, Raiden's a real person, but maybe he didn't really, like, fight Solidus the way we thought he did, you know? Like, this is almost kind of like a hallucination on his part. Maybe he's really doing these things, but they're not how we see them.
I mean, I think that, I think that the game is pretty outrageous in some moments, but I don't think it's too far from the reality that Metal Gear Solid 1 set up to begin with. I mean, we're talking that we had a man who, like, was, like, friends with ravens and had a tank, and you fought a tank single-handedly, which is an impossible feat by itself.
More impossible than fighting 25 rays?
You fought a Heinz. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's not... They've already set up a reality that's pretty exaggerated.
A heightened reality.
And I'm just being the devil's advocate here, because I really love the idea of it being VR, and I think that's, like... For me personally, I think that's the most interesting way to look at it, because it asks more questions than if it... Like, it just asks a lot of questions of what you experience is real, like the Matrix.
But that's a really good point, though. Like, you're talking about Vulcan Raven, you have Psycho Mantis, you have all these weird kind of supernatural or kind of outlandish unreality things happening. And so, yeah, I think that's a valid point. Like, a guy named Vulcan Raven who fucking talked to ravens existed, so why couldn't a guy who's a vampire and who's immortal...
Yeah,
can walk on
exactly.
Water,
and like if you're talking about physics and like vamp walking on water, I mean, Psycho Mantis like threw pots with you with his mind.
But
like, that's outrageous.
Again, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate. Psycho Mantis was explained away as being a genetic experiment.
Sure,
it's not
but
supernatural.
So is Vamp.
Yeah.
In Metal Gear Solid 4.
Right, but I mean, I think that's implied. I mean, he's part of Dead Cell, and so is...
But it's actually implied that he's a vampire because he literally drinks blood. Why would he drink blood if he's
I think it's
killed
like
by
a
nanomachines?
persona that he adopted.
Well, I mean, we would have to address that when we play Metal Gear Solid 4, but we're just talking about Metal Gear Solid 2.
That's a really good point, though, that the sort of the reality he already set up in Metal Gear Solid 1 can totally coexist with Metal Gear Solid 2. They're not jarring against each other. Like, yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that maybe because graphics were more realistic and that he had a more realistic character like Raiden, who was like, I don't know what's going on. What's this about? Where for like, instead of like Snake, who just kind of went with it. Maybe that's why it's so hard to like, maybe that's why it's so shocking, is because the character's a little bit more realistic. He's less like an action hero, even though he used to be an action hero when he was a kid. He is less like an action hero now because he's been kind of wiped clean, and he's more like you. He's more like you walking in and going, why is there a vampire guy?
Right.
Where Snake should have walked in and been like, how the fuck did I take out that tank with a grenade?
Snake goes in and he's like, all right.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not like, how's this guy talk to ravens? He's just like, Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know why there is a reality switch there. Maybe it's because of Raiden. Maybe Raiden is that switch.
Well, Josh, I think one of the reasons why you have the VR in the VR interpretation, and I think it's a fair point, Dora. But I think the reason why you have the VR interpretation is because Kojima really does kind of sow that seed.
Oh, he
he does
does.
lay he lays those the little breadcrumb for you to follow.
Oh yeah, there's definitely like very overt, like the shots of multiple Solid Snakes running around.
Yeah.
That talk about I've done 300 VR missions.
Right.
All these sort of, and the idea that like the kernel can also be kernel as in computer, and like shell can be the shell interface, and like you have to download, like there's you have to name yourself, like it's so overt, but at the same time is open to like
I mean, there's just those overt things, and there's also things like, I mean, you're basically in a cheesy plotline to save the president. I mean, if even that's just kind of it's just like, why?
Even in Metal Gear Solid 1, it wasn't something as cheesy as saving the president. It was like, it was very convoluted. And it was like, you weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed, like, you weren't there to do anything other than kill Liquid.
Right.
But at the same time, that's your plot. That's the plot of Metal Gear Solid 2. The whole point of the game is for Raiden to kill Solidus, which he does. Whereas it's same as with Snake and Raiden, they're both tools.
So he's like manipulated to kill Solidus.
And one of the things that I think is interesting too, just to give an idea of how self-reflexive and like how much this game folds in on itself, there's a scene where Ocelot comes in and he shoots the president. You meet the president, and then he says, "Kill me," and you puss out, so Ocelot does it for you. And then Ocelot, what he says to you, he says, "See you around, carrier boy," which in the context of the game doesn't make any sense. What it's supposed to be is a callback to Metal Gear Solid 1, where he calls a Snake carrier boy because he's carrying the Fox Die virus. And it's also a callback to Apocalypse Now, where he says, you're not an assassin, you're a carrier boy trying to deliver a bill. So that it's a double reference, but it's also interesting because there's a triple meaning there, because Ocelot calls him carrier boy because not only is it a callback to the Fox Die virus, he also knows that the president just gave him the virus for the AI, for the computer AI, and he also knows that Raiden is just a tool, just like that Solid Snake was in the first game to deliver the Fox Die virus. He's escorting him along so he can kill Solidus. That's how much this game folds in on itself. Like that one line, "See you around, carrier boy." There's so much you can read into that.
But do you think that's a fake out for thinking that Raiden is carrying Fox Die with him? For any reason? Or do you think
there's a moment earlier in the game, too, where you're supposed to think that
Raiden's carrying Fox Die?
Yeah. But it turns out it's his nanomachines.
Fox.
Oh,
Die.
It's when Ames dies.
Oh, right.
Yeah, when you use his nanomachines to kill Ames.
Looks like he's having a heart attack.
Yeah, and you're supposed to be like, oh, this is so there's a lot of fake outs like that. I'm going to use this as an
Not again. He checks his arm back.
Yeah. It's when Mr. X comes down. Yeah. So I'm going to use that point to carry us on to the big section. And the reason I call it the big section because it opens it up to so much conversation. And this leads me to my theory about what the game is. And I'm just to start it off, I'm going to use another quote from our lovely viewer, myself. In conversation with him, he, I think, said
a quote from myself.
Yeah, it's me, basically, as the number one viewer.
To the viewer, it really does seem like you were just talking about yourself.
That's what his name is.
To everyone else who doesn't know who myself is.
He was very smart, and he or she was very smart in picking out that name.
Yeah, for sure.
But they had to really I think it's a golden quote, where in a conversation they said, I would say I think Metal Gear Solid 3 is the best told story in the franchise. However, Metal Gear Solid 2 is the one with the most to say.
Yeah.
And I think that's
absolutely
fucking gold.
Yeah.
And what I would say, just I'm going to use that to launch this new section of the conversation. I really think that the point of the game is not whether this is real, is not whether this is happening, or, even if it's not even about the Patriots. What it is, it's a game about video games. It's about the medium of video games and what making one means and what playing one means and how it can be used to pass on memes and the experience of a gamer playing a video game. And it is one of the first – it's weird that it's a video game. I'm saying this about a video game, but it's one of the first things at the turn of the century that was really called postmodern. You can call it a postmodern work. And it sounds like a pretentious phrase. and it can be used pretentiously. But what it means is postmodern is a game, or not just a game, any piece of art. It could be a film, it can be a book, it can be a painting. It just means that it was something that the artist created that was never intended to have one meaning. And that's what modernism was. Modernism was a movement at the turn of the century, where artists were working together, and they had the idea of, if we were portraying things in novels and books and paintings, working towards one ideal, because we wanted to show something about humanity, and that we all have a shared experience, and we have a shared sort of identity that if we deconstruct things, it'll reveal some deep truth. That's what modernism is about. What postmodernism is saying there is no one truth. There is no one shared identity. The modern world is so fractured, and it basically exists in a state of schizophrenia, that every person has multiple identities, and there's no one truth. There's multiple truths. So that's the basic nugget of what postmodernism is that it's something that artists use to make you question the medium of art itself. Is there truth in art? Can a video game ever say anything about the real world? And
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe that's why Metal Gear Solid 4 exists, is because there were so many fans that were like, yeah, it's just VR. Like, it's obviously VR. And Kojima's like, fuck you, it's reality.
Well, the VR...
What if it was reality? I think that's an interesting take on it, like, in itself. If it's reality, it means this, and this. I mean, that's interesting in itself, because you could go on a rant either way, and it's interesting. I think that's cool.
Well, the main argument within postmodern works, and Kojima, he didn't at the time, but since then he has admitted that he's gone calling Metal Gear Solid 2 postmodern. Like, he uses that in conversation when talking about it, because it's something that he subscribed to. He was interested in the movement. The main focus of postmodern works is the argument between what's real and what's not real, authenticity and originality. And so, like, a famous postmodern film would be Blade Runner. We're talking about, like, what does it mean to be human? Is the main character even human? Is the robot more human? You know, so you could, like, watch that movie. One of the reasons that's one of my favorite movies is because there's actually, like, 5 versions of it. There's the theatrical release, there's the final cut, there's the director cut, there's an international cut, and they're all different. And they all have, like, you can watch it several different times and have different meanings, like different interpretations of it. And I think that's a great analog for what the game is. And in my interpretation, Metal Gear Solid 2 is a game about sequels to games, because in the storyline of the game, or the timeline of Kojima making these things, this is Metal Gear Solid 2 is the 4th Metal Gear game. There's Metal Gear 1 for the MSX, Solid Snake, Metal Gear Solid, and then Metal Gear Solid 2. And when you look at the series, every game is a rehash of what had become before. Metal Gear Solid 1 was a full-on remake of Solid Snake.
Right.
I mean, we've talked about this when we played Metal Gear Solid 1, how many, like, he reuses the elevator sequence. Frank Yeager comes back as Gray Fox, someone calling himself Deep Throat. Like, he just recycles the same things. And so at this point in the second Solid game, and, like, what's the difference between Metal Gear and Metal Gear Solid? Like, it's two series, you know? I mean, like, it's already schizophrenic.
Yeah.
At this point, he's just like, I've said everything I've had to say in the first game. If you really want me to make a sequel, the only reason he made Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake was because there was an American release for the NES that was called Snake's Revenge, and he was just like, fuck that. That's not the sequel to my game. I'm gonna make one. That was kind of the same thing, where he made Metal Gear Solid 2 just as a response, kind of like what you guys were saying with Metal Gear Solid 4. And I think he was just like, at this point, I don't even know what to say anymore. So I'm going to say that I don't trust games. Like, you have to question what you're playing, because we've talked about this throughout the entire game. The game Metal Gear Solid 2 is just about manipulation and frustration of the player experience, because time after time we're told to do things that we like. Dora, you said this throughout the gameplay. Why is Colonel telling me to do this? Because I couldn't have gotten to this point if I didn't already know how to do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's very patronizing.
Yeah.
And at the time, I mean, Metal Gear Solid 2 was one of the most hyped games, most hyped sequels.
It was enormous, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was such expectation. Even before the trailers released, there was just like the rumors and rumblings that Kojima was going to come out with a sequel. And it's just kind of like Kojima saying, how do I live up to the hype? I don't.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that hype was about having a sequel to Metal Gear Solid 1, and Kojima saying, all that you want is to play Metal Gear Solid 1 again.
Right.
That's what everyone wants.
That's what everybody who wants a sequel, they're like, they want the same thing again. And so I get like, well, why don't you just go play Metal Gear Solid 1?
Right.
If that's what you want, go play that.
So that's what
I already made that.
That's what the whole plant section, the very beginning of plant section, Big Shell, when you take over as Raiden, it's almost punishing you for wanting a sequel to Metal Gear Solid 1.
It's like, here's the tanker. This is what you wanted, but that's not what you're getting. So that's over. Let's go over to the plant chapter now. And this is what I really wanted to make.
Right. Well, I mean, the plant chapter, you're constantly forced to do the same thing over and over again. Like, you get interrupted to codec calls while you're lining up a shot.
Yeah.
Like, it'll actually interrupt as you're about to pull the trigger. And if you read the design document, Kojima actually says several times, this will be a frustrating experience for the player. Like, this is like, he says, I understand that this will be frustrating. And he was full aware what he was doing. I mean, because we've said this throughout while we were playing it, Metal Gear Solid 2 is a complete retread of Metal Gear Solid 1. Even like I was just saying, with Raiden being used as a carrier to kill Solidus, just like Solid Snake was being used as a carrier for the Foxeye virus. So you could easily explain it saying that what Metal Gear Solid 2 is a gamer playing a video game that is a simulation of Metal Gear Solid 1. Yeah. And that I mean, maybe Raiden is just a video gamer. He's not a soldier. He's just some dude playing a video game. Yeah. And it's supposed to be, again, that analog. And then with him being a child soldier would be like, not necessarily that you, the player, you were a child soldier, but like, you don't know anything. Like, the game, like that character you're playing is whatever the game says it is. Right. It's not in your control. Like, you can project yourself onto this character, but you don't have any control over him. And it's kind of like at the end of the game when he throws away the dog tags. Right. It's like kind of saying, this guy's out of your control. You don't know who he is. Yeah,
and it starts even earlier than that. It starts when he comes out of the torture room and like he is running around naked and sneezing without your permission, and he doesn't grab a gun, he grabs a sword. Right. He has his identity as he uses a sword. Right. Unlike Solid Snake. And
never in the series before.
It just keeps diverging from there. He keeps disobeying you. Like, you're taking down the Metal Gear Rays, and he says, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. So like, it just continues to split, and that's when he starts to become his own character and splits from the player.
Right. And it really does kind of punish you for your bloodlust, too, because in these games, it really is about killing people. And it's weird that we were talking about that, like when he gets that sword, you can't do it non-lethal anymore. Yeah, you have to kill those characters.
I thought you could do it non-lethal.
Yeah, you can flip the blade over.
No, but I mean...
oh, you mean like when you're Snake, or when you're fighting with Snake and you're having to take down all those people? Right, and you're naked, and you just got your... Are you naked, or you just got your stuff back?
There's a sequence before you go into the hallway, and you're walking. There's a section there where it basically prompts you to kill everything that you see. And well, I mean, you possibly could do it non-lethal, but it's like you're punishing yourself by doing it. It's pretty hard. Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah, you can beat the whole game without killing anybody.
But it's basically the game's trying to, because it's acknowledging the fact that most people want to go through these games and killing people, and the game kind of punishes you for that.
But Snake openly kills people. Like, it's not like you're the bad guy because you're killing people. Snake, who is the hero, is standing right next to you killing someone. Right. So it's not like, in this reality, it's not a bad thing to kill someone.
And it's the Snake that you wanted.
Yeah.
But that's a part of that's the program.
Right.
I'm not saying that the program openly wants, that's kind of my point, guys.
That's what
the program openly wants you to kill people, but it has to be the player impulse. Kojima's encouraging you to not kill people. Right. He rewards you for not killing people. Right. He gives you the chance to do it. And as the game progresses, it makes it harder and harder for you not to kill people. And that's kind of supposed to be like identifying yourself by fighting the game and saying, no, I want to do this non-lethal. Huh. And again, like I was saying before, this was supposed to be like flat out the last Metal Gear Solid game. Like, Kojima was like, I'm never doing one again. And he was more serious than he had been before at the time. It's supposedly every game's the last game. But doesn't it make sense if this was Kojima going out in a blaze of glory? Like, burning the bridges. Like, let's see you make a sequel to this fucking game.
Yeah. That's a common comment, is that like, oh, he always says it's going to be his last game. So I could see him personally being tired of it, and people like making the joke that, like, he always says he's going to not make another one, but you know he's going to make another one. But maybe it's like he doesn't want to make another sequel.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's why every game's been so divergent from the other ones. That's why we end up with that sort of James Bond feel to it, where it's like they're connected tenuously, but like it's Like Metal Gear Solid 3, like let's throw out everything I did in 2 and let's
Yeah.
do something completely different. Let's go to the jungle. Okay, 4 is far future. Let's see
Yeah.
what happens there. This one, you build a base and then you have to manage RPG like mechanics instead
Right.
of like what you typically
Yeah,
do. in
Peace
those short
Walker's a
missions.
huge departure.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And so I think everyone is like, okay, if I'm going to make another Metal Gear, I'm going to make a Metal Gear unlike the previous one I made.
Yeah.
I don't want to make you Metal Gear Solid 2 again.
Right. Which is the whole point of this game.
Right.
Yeah. And you said something that's like, it's like you called back to that James Bond thing. Kojima actually says in the design document and other interviews that the game was never supposed to have a continuity. That's why there's all the crazy shit with Liquid's arm. And we talked about this during the gameplay, that the game was originally supposed to end with Snake jumping off Arsenal and chasing the Ray. It was going to have the crazy codec calls built into that. But
Right.
that was going to be the last narrative thing that you saw. Because Kojima has said that the game the Metal Gear Solid series was always supposed to be like a comic book. It was supposed to be an endless franchise that you never got to see the whole story. That's why with Philanthropy, you never see those in-between stories, all these adventures that Snake has gone on, because he's supposed to be like Indiana Jones. And that gives you the idea that like, this game is never supposed to have answers. And that's another reason why it's schizophrenic and postmodern, is that he introduces all these ideas of identity and fractured, the fractured reality. You're not sure what the truth. It never, at any point, it never attempts to address or even somewhat present a solution to these questions.
Right.
It's more of about presenting them. And it's like, basically the end of the game, Josh, your favorite part, with the Colonel and Rose talking, like laying down the truth. It's about junk data and memes and how harmful thoughtless junk data can be to us, and about just consuming things without thinking about them. And I think that is the message. That's the main point of Metal Gear Solid 2, is trying to make the player realize that video games are junk data. Unless you actively engage with them or questioning what's going on, it's going to just fuck up the way you think, and it's going to be useless information that you're buying into a perception of reality that basically corporations are designing for you to consume. And I don't think Kojima ever actually had an answer to this, like the problem of what that means. But he just said, "Hey, just fucking question it.
Yeah.
Just question what you're playing."
I like that. I think that by doing that, he's not telling the player that they're stupid. In fact, he's saying,
Right.
You're smarter than this. You're smarter than wanting another Metal Gear Solid 1 game. You want something more than
Right.
this.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give you something more and make you think about what you're doing and about what, like, that you are a player, that you're killing people.
Right.
Whether it's in a game or not, you're killing people in this reality. I think that's way cooler than if he would have just made, if it would all been Tinker. Like, he thinks we're smarter than that.
And
That's
Josh,
awesome.
this is a conversation that we had off microphone. That one of the things about Kojima is we were talking about, like, who's his intended audience? Like, is it the Japanese? Is it the American? And not so much about that, but just in talking about that, we came to the conclusion that Kojima never dumbs down his message.
Right.
Like, he's writing these games for that, like, 5% of people who will actually be like, wait a minute, what is junk data? Does that mean the game that I'm playing is junk data? Like, he's expecting those people to be actually thinking about it. So every time you see Johnny taking a shit into a barrel, I mean, his humor is dumbed down a little bit.
Yeah.
It's very broad, but that's just who Kojima is.
Right. I feel like he makes them for him as much as he can get away with and as much as he is allowed within his boundaries. He does what he wants to do,
Right.
wants to do, and he's not really. I hope he's not thinking too much about the people who might play it, and I feel like he
Right.
probably doesn't,
Well,
because that's how we got Metal Gear Solid 2.
Isn't that interesting, though, that he's like, I'm going to do what I want to do, but I want you to question it? Like,
Yeah.
that's what's so great about Metal Gear Solid 2. And he at every point, he's saying, you realize that this is a reality that is completely handcrafted, and it's just any fucking thing that pops into my head. It's what you're experiencing.
Right. I can do whatever I want.
Right. But that's not like, here I am talking about, like, the Patriots and doing all these conspiracy theories, but, like, don't just take my word for it. Like, because at the end of the game, so this brings me to something else. Raiden never actually accomplishes anything in the game. He does exactly what he was programmed to do. And you can
Right.
even have the interpretation that after he kills Solidus, which was the only reason he's in the game to begin with, is because
Yeah.
the Patriots have been using him to kill Solidus. And when he throws away his dog tags, just like we're saying with the Matrix, that, you know, Neo being the chosen one is all part of the program. The reason Snake and Rose magically appear out of nowhere is because the VR is just kind of folding in on itself and trying to accommodate for the fact that he's going to be schizophrenic now because he's been introduced to the idea that there's Patriots.
Like he broke the program.
Yeah.
I think like when Colonel's talking and Rose are talking, their conversation is so hopeless. There's no hope built into it. It's all like, you're part of this program, deal with it. Like there's no way that you're going to be an individual because you're all a part of what we're telling you to be.
Right.
And he almost has no reaction to that. I think at that point, it's literally like dots and maybe a question mark thrown in and maybe a
The
But,
end
like,
question mark?
There's no like he kind of tries to argue it, but he doesn't really try very hard.
Right.
And
Every
I think,
time he brings up a point, they shoot it down like
Yeah.
surgically.
Yeah, they shoot it down like they know exactly what he's going to say anyway. And at the end, I just think that it's so hopeless. And like as the player, you feel like, yeah, maybe I am. Like maybe this is reality and I'm not my own individual, but I think it's cool. Like at the end, there's such a hopeful ending. And I just think it's weird because he had no reaction. He had no fighting it. He just sort of almost accepted.
He just goes with everything, yeah.
He just accepted what
He even
Colonel
goes
and
along
Rose
with what
said.
Solid says at the end too, because when the Patriots are like, "Well, this is the way it is," and he goes, "I guess it's true."
Yeah.
You know, and then and they're like, "Well, you're going to kill Solidus first," and he's like, "Well, I'm going to kill Solid, but it's not for you; it's for me." But wouldn't that be like they just use reverse psychology on him?
Yeah.
You know, and then when Solid comes Snake comes at the end, and he's like, "You did good." I mean, then he just goes along with everything that Solid says. You know, like.
And then Rose appears, which is stupid.
You've never even seen her.
Because you're like, she was just telling you all these horrible things.
You don't even know, but you think that's AI, and it's really unclear if Rose was ever actually a real person.
Yeah.
And then Vamp is in the background. He makes an appearance in the background. So you really have to question, like, how real is this? And I really think it's just Kojima saying, I refuse to say what is real and is not real. I'm glad that you're questioning, but the whole point of this game is to make you question what your expectations are, what you expect out of a video game, and especially if a sequel out of a sequel. And it's pretty funny that he was railing against junk data when his primary method of getting all this to us is through info dumps.
Yeah.
Coming at us a mile a minute. But that's the point. It's supposed to frustrate us because we're expecting a casual game that we can just breeze through and kill people and not think about it. And then Kojima's trying to stop us. He's trying to slow us down, be like, hey, this isn't what you think. You're not in control of this thing.
It feels weirdly like a walk through philosophies or something. Like the way like you were mentioning how it feels so hopeless. And I just thought of like nihilism, like nothing matters. What am I doing? That's sort of like where he was at that state.
Yeah.
And then like the scene after that, after he kills Solidus and he's and Snake shows up and Rose shows up and they start talking and it gets sort of like this hopeful, like you said. It goes from being completely hopeless and nothing matters to like, well, what matters is my experience and what I pass
What
on.
I choose to believe, yeah.
Right. And so
but there's like that corny saxophone music out of nowhere, and then Rose, you know what I mean? Like, but doesn't it seem kind of, it seems kind of, for me, it rings kind of hollow, like a little fake, but that's the point, is when Solid says it doesn't matter.
Right, it doesn't matter
what you choose to believe, yeah.
Real is perception, and like, so if what you just had was real.
But isn't that Kojima saying, this is a video game?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you choose to believe it's VR. If this really happened, it's a fucking video game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my point, that the whole point of Metal Gear Solid 2 is that it's a game about video games and never tries to be anything else. And that's why we are like at this conversation, like, how does this explain Metal Gear Solid 4? Like, how do these two work together? And it's just like, well, they're video games.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
It never tries to be anything else at every point. I mean, like, Colonel's like, press triangle on the controller. I mean, how do you incorporate that if it's supposed to be realistic? It does at every turn. It's supposed to be a video game.
It's okay with being what it is.
Exactly, and I think that's the
honest.
Key, that's the key to the franchise. Once you realize that it's never anything else other than the video game, but a very realistic story with messages.
Yeah.
A very well made and thought out video game, but it understands the medium that it is.
Right. It's okay with that. It's not trying to be something else. As much as he loves movies.
I was just going to say that.
Like, as much as he loves that,
yeah.
like, he still accepts the medium he's working in, and he's okay with the medium he's working in.
Right.
And like a lot of video games are afraid to be video games. And he's like, this is the way the medium works. It's like if a painting tried to be a movie.
Right.
Like he's okay with it.
Josh, go ahead, Dora.
I was just going to say, and that's what makes it so genuine, and I think that's why we were all drawn to it, because it's not like it's trying to be something it's not, or he's trying to get across anything that isn't existing in his own life at that time. He's being very genuine about these thoughts. This hopeless feeling at the end of the game that you get is the hopeless feeling that he's had and he's experiencing, and I think that he's just trying to get it out there. He doesn't have an answer. I don't think that Kojima has an answer
It's an expression,
for that at all.
Well,
I think he's just
what
like,
more can he do?
what about this? Guys, what about this?
If he comes up with an
I don't
answer, how is
know.
any different from the Patriots with
Right.
trying to tell us what to think?
Exactly.
It's kind of like maybe it was on his mind and he was like, this is sort of like an expression of how I've been feeling and what I've been thinking about. Like, I don't really know what to make of it, but this is what I made, like, from that thinking and that sort of turning over of different philosophies and things in my head. Like, this is what I made. I don't know where to go from here.
And I wonder if he thought, what would Snake say to that? What would Snake say to this hopelessness? And then he just like went on that rant at the end of the game, and it's not even an answer.
Yeah.
But it's like, this is what Snake would say to that. I don't know what that's like.
It's like it's talking to himself. Like,
right.
How do you accept
it's a
that this is the
dialogue.
reality? Like, how do you accept that? How do you be okay with that? And Snake's answer is this is how you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird.
I think that you guys just fucking gold, because I have some notes that I have here, things to talk about, and you guys fucking just went right over like exactly the points that I wanted to make. Like, I think it's fantastic, especially since I'm going to address two things. When you said that Kojima was he was comfortable with his medium, and he was just, even though he loves games, he knows he's a video game designer. Like, you read my fucking mind. One of the things that I wanted to point out is, like, one of my favorite authors of all time is Alan Moore, the guy who wrote Watchmen and V for Vendetta and just countless great, like, classic comic books. If you watch the Watchmen movie, which sounds weird, the Watchmen movie,
who watches the Watchmen movie?
that movie doesn't have his name anywhere on it.
Right.
Because he took his name off of it. Alan Moore actually said, and this is one of the things that he is famous for saying, and one of the reasons why I just adore him, he said he has no interest in ever making a movie based on any of his books, any of his comic books, because every story that he wrote was written to be a comic book.
Right.
And he never wanted to have a Watchmen movie, because he said, if I wanted there be a Watchmen movie, I would have written a fucking movie.
Right.
Everything that is in The Watchmen is a love letter to comic books, and it was specifically written so that it would only work as a comic book. As soon as you translate it to another medium, it destroys the message of the book.
Yeah, that's my thought about, like, they're talking about a Metal Gear Solid movie or like a Dark Souls movie. It's like, that doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
They're built as this.
You can have it exist as sort of like ancillary same thing off to the side, but it would never have the spirit.
Right.
It would
It's
never
not that.
Yeah.
It can't be that, because movies can't do what games can do and vice versa.
Yeah, so I mean, the Metal Gear Solid series never lets you forget that it's a video game and that you're experiencing it's a simulated experience. Regardless if you believe the things Metal Gear Solid 2 happen or not for Raiden, it's VR for us.
Right.
As the player, it's a virtual reality for us. And so he never lets you forget that. And Kojima, he's embracing the fact that what he's presenting to you is a simulated reality. And he does the things that are like, these things are only possible in video games.
Right.
If you made a Metal Gear Solid 2 movie, it would basically be like Matrix Revolutions, where he meets the architect and he's like, well, this has all been accounted for. And yeah, it's kind of strange. And you're like, oh, that's weird. But it doesn't apply to you on a personal level, because you're not actively engaged with the movie.
Right.
You don't have a hand in making the events come out how you thought they were.
Right.
And so I think that's the great thing about Metal Gear Solid 2, is that because you're actively engaged in it and you're a player, it's an active experience. That sort of mind fuck at the end affects you on a deeper level, because you feel like you had an agency in getting there. You're invested in there more than you would be in a movie.
It's kind of like BioShock.
The decisions you make?
Yeah. So, like, the twist in BioShock where you're just like,
Would you kindly?
yeah, like, wait a second, I thought I had control. Like, oh no, you're playing a video game. You never had control. I don't know why you thought that.
Yeah.
You never had control. You're doing what I told you to do because I made this.
But would they ever have been able to do that without Metal Gear? I mean, like, that Metal Gear Solid 2 came out like how many years before that? And it's kind of the same twist.
Yeah.
Yeah, but exactly. Yeah, it's just I think Kojima was probably one of the first people to understand, hey, this is a new medium that we're not taking advantage of.
Right.
Like the idea of interaction with the audience. And I think that's why we can refer to Metal Gear Solid 2 as art. Feel slightly pretentious about it, but we feel we feel you can still say, but hey, it was one of the first video games that actually tried to be more than a video game.
Right. He fully understood his medium and what it could do, and he made it work.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to bring it back. I just realized that's why Rose is at the end of the game, is because he asks all these really hopeless questions. Snake answers it, but he also wants the answer from his ideal woman.
Right.
And so Rose shows up and gives him more answers. As like Kojima is basically answering his own questions.
Oh,
I just think that's fucking mind-blowing for me. Because I always wondered why she's there.
You're addressing what we said earlier in the series, that Rose is actually based on his ideal woman.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what you're calling back to. Yes. It's based on his girlfriend at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or ex-girlfriend or girlfriend. I don't know.
They were still together at the time.
They were still together at the time.
Yeah.
So that's why she's there. I mean, there's no other reason why she...
It's almost like he's consoling himself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's so weird. Okay.
Yeah. Fucking meta, yeah.
That just blew my mind.
There
and
you go.
The ending makes so much more sense.
This room is covered
now.
with Dora's brains.
Yes.
That's what happens when you like put yourself into a game. Like a lot of games, most games nowadays are built to. Some things are made because somebody wants them to exist. Some things are made because people want to make money. And this is one of those things that was made because somebody wanted it to exist.
But Konami wanted to make a lot of money too. It's a little bit of both.
Well, yeah, that's like a side
both.
effect. But it's like Kojima's concern wasn't to make money. Kojima's concern was like, I want to make this thing exist.
But that's why it's a great game. Because he went against that hype.
Right. It's most games nowadays are made because somebody feels like they can make money off of it. Rarely do you get a game that is made because somebody wants that game to exist.
See, now, okay, that's a good segue, because the other thing I wanted to address that you guys brought up is the idea of the sequels and what happens after Metal Gear Solid 2, because you're saying that's why Metal Gear Solid 2 is a great game. It's because Kojima was like, there's something that needs to be said. And then we get Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah.
Where Kojima didn't want anything to do with it.
And I feel like that's evident in it.
Yeah. He didn't want any. He felt dragged back into it, and that's why the game almost ends with Snake putting a fucking barrel in his mouth. This is the next question I wanted to ask. Metal Gear Solid 2 is revered now, but at the time, people hated it. And I'm saying on a general populist level. Yeah. Like Madden 95, 95, very specific. The Madden series, Call of Duty gamers, just random, like they hated it. Because, there's a naked dude riding around and I don't understand what happens at the end. Fans loved it. And so it was considered, hit and miss. It was mixed reception. And so most people considered the best game in the series, and a show of hands, who agrees with this, best game in the series is Metal Gear Solid 3. I see a hand there, Josh. Oh, yeah, Dory, you think Metal Gear Solid 1 is the best one? Yeah, fair enough. But a mixed reaction. Yeah. A lot of people consider Metal Gear Solid 3 to be the even myself, which is still weird to say, our viewer, our lovely viewer, said that he thinks that Metal Gear Solid 3 is the most well-told story, but Metal Gear Solid 2 is the most to say. I'm almost thinking that Metal Gear Solid 3 is like an apology for telling such a complicated and weird game because Metal Gear Solid,
like a reward if like
exactly
you stuck through Metal Gear Solid 2 with me. Here's a game similar to kind of like what you wanted.
Yeah, it's just gonna say, isn't Metal Gear Solid
just fun?
Isn't Metal Gear Solid 3 all tanker?
Yeah.
It's exactly what we wanted.
I can see that.
He trolls us at the beginning when Big Boss takes his mask off and it looks like Raiden. Yeah. Like, right off the bat, Kojima is like, I gotcha. No, but kidding. We're having fun. Yeah. We're going to have fun. You know what I mean?
This is going to be fun.
This is going to be fun.
He's like, I said what I needed to say with Metal Gear Solid 2. I don't need to say that again. So let's go back and let's just have some fun. I like James Bond. Let's do that.
So, like, what I'm wondering is that maybe that's why Kojima always says that he's going to quit. Every game's going to be the last game is because he should have quit with Metal Gear Solid 2 because that's all he had to say. He had said his piece. That was the fourth game. I don't have anything else. The fact that like I'm not rage quitting, but like I'm gracefully bowing out. I'm going out with a bang. And people can make sequels. He was fine with the Konami making games up at that point. He was fine with Konami making more games without him. He had given them his blessing. But it's interesting that like in the context of what we're talking about, Metal Gear Solid 3 really seems kind of like fan service in the sense that, like, thanks for sticking around, like you said. Here's
Yeah.
some fun. And then Metal Gear Solid 4 is fan service in the other way.
Yeah.
Like me again.
Like, here's...
Yeah.
It almost...
Here's some
Weird.
candy, like me again.
I felt it wasn't even that. I felt like Metal Gear Solid 4 was more like, here, you want answers to all those fucking questions you didn't need answers to? Here's all your fucking answers.
But that's what I'm
Shut
saying.
up.
He's trying to please us.
Yeah, but I don't think it was like a pleasing way. It was more like, all right, if I have to make this fucking thing and there's no way around it because I'm getting death threats,
Yeah.
then fuck you. Here's your game. Here's all
Yeah.
the stupid answers to all the stupid questions you didn't need to ask.
But doesn't Metal Gear Solid 4 seem like a total inversion of Metal Gear Solid 2?
Yeah.
Where it is, everything is 100% at face value.
Everything's explained.
Everything is answered. There's a modern, and I would say a modernist sort of like truth behind everything.
Yeah.
Like at the end when you meet, spoiler, fuck you, play the game. When you meet Big Boss at the end, which is, I'm sorry, even though I still got a fan boner when I saw that.
Yeah.
I just love Big Boss. So when you meet him at the end, and he literally lays it down on the line. This is the truth behind everything. Everything you know is a lie. Everything you know is a lie, and here's the truth. And it's the inversion of the Patriots, where AI at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, they were like, everything you know is a lie, and here's the truth. But it's still kind of weird. You might not, like, we might still be fucking you. At the end, Metal Gear Solid 4, Big Boss comes out and he's like, "This is everything you know is a lie. Here's the truth, and I love you. I have no reason to lie to you. This game's gonna end with a hug, and it's gonna be a nice moment. I trust you. I love you. Everything has come full circle." What fucking antithesis of Metal Gear Solid 2? I mean, like the complete opposite.
That's absolutely
where you're
true.
saying Metal Gear Solid 2 is a nihilistic game that makes you question everything. Metal Gear Solid 4 is wrapped up in a nice little bow. I just think that's really interesting. So I'm going to ask the question that I've been wanting to ask since the beginning of this podcast. Go ahead.
So I'm just thinking now, like, what does that make Metal Gear Solid 5? So if like Metal Gear Solid 1 was like the rebirth,
You are getting
Metal Gear Solid 2 was like, I don't want to make a sequel to a game and make the same game I already made. So here's a game about sequels. And then Metal Gear Solid 3 was like, thanks for sticking with me. Here's the game you kind of wanted, but I'm going to do it differently because I don't want to make that same game. But here's the sequel you kind of wanted. And then Metal Gear Solid 4 was like, here's the inversion of 2. Like, here's all the fucking answers. Here's everything you wanted to see. Everything's explained. There's no questions at the end of it. What does that make Metal Gear Solid 5?
Josh, you read my fucking mind. What if we've gone full circle? What if the Phantom Pain is Kojima full well knowing this is really, for reals, I'm burning the bridges in every way possible, i.e. getting fired from Konami, so there's no coming back. Burning the bridges, it's going to be the sequel to Metal Gear Solid 2. What if this is the marriage between Metal Gear Solid 3 and Metal Gear Solid 2, where it's going to be fan-pleasing, and yet he still gets to go out with his message? Because it really seems like it's going that way. With all the psychedelic stuff, and it's so funny because we're talking from the past. The people listening to this in the future, they know all the answers.
Yeah.
They know what happens. But it's fun for us to speculate. What if that game is like, what if it has that same, because all the psychedelic stuff that we're seeing, boss going crazy, questioning what's real, what's not real, all these conspiracy theories that we have. What if that game, it really seems like it's going to go into that angle of like, question what you're playing.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially because Ground Zeroes is very controversial and how violent. And Kojima has said that Phantom Pain is going to be about controversial topics, child soldiers again. And
Almost too much so.
yeah, but I mean, that's like that sort of thing.
Uncomfortably so, yeah.
We all wanted Metal Gear Solid 5, and it's a series about soldiers and violence, killing your fathers. It's all about those things. And Kojima is saying, hey, this is what the sequel I'm going to give you the sequel you didn't think you wanted.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's even theories that Big Boss isn't Big Boss. Like, there's someone like
Multiple
that would
theories about
be-
who it could possibly be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
almost seems-
right there seems like
It almost seems like if
A
it was
write-in.
Big yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or the Chico is quiet fucking thing that like
Which has been like
right.
Disproved,
yeah.
He said, it's not, but like
but he's lied before.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
David Jaffe said he wasn't
fucking
making Twisted
asshole.
Metal right before he announced Twisted Metal. So like he could be lying, but he also could be telling the truth, and maybe that is also part of it. Like
Yeah.
I could be telling truth, I could be lying.
I
what
go ahead.
if you end up playing Hal's father? Like
You're
You're
Huey,
just in a wheelchair
But
the entire game.
What if
Crippled.
halfway through the game there's a switchover and you're playing as a completely new character?
What if you're quiet the rest of the game?
No, what if I'm saying, was Raiden? There was no hint of Raiden.
Right.
He wasn't in the American trailers at all.
Yeah.
We have no idea what's coming, and that's what's so exciting about this
It's
game.
so exciting.
Or maybe
Yeah.
it was hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
I just heard a theory yesterday that somebody said that like they think that like you're playing as Skullface. I was like, what the fuck? And I know we've talked about this
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
Like I've mentioned like maybe we play as Skullface and we
Yeah.
don't know it.
Right.
Because he wears a mask. Maybe he doesn't have a face. Maybe he just puts on Big Boss's face. Like what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But but also like just to wrap it up with what you're saying with Raiden thing, how fucking cool and cyclical would it be is if halfway through the game and you play a Solid Snake, and it was like that sort of like that kind of like that love letter apology.
That would be a hug to the fans.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd be excited or not. But yeah, that would be a like
No,
Especially
but Big
since-
Boss is still in the game.
right.
But he's in the game the same way that Solid Snake was in Metal Gear Solid 2.
Right, but I feel like it would be like a hug to the fans. It would be like, hey, I love you guys. You've been with me for almost 30 years now.
Yeah.
Here's a big hug. This is what you wanted. We're closing the loop. This is the last one I'm ever making. Let's all go out happy.
You're assuming it has the same happy ending that Metal Gear Solid 4 does. I'm saying that it's going to be more like Metal Gear Solid 2. And what if you find out, and here's like crazy fan theory. Here's my crazy fan theory that is probably going to be completely wrong, but I just think it's funny. If it is more nihilistic than that, and you find out that there's multiple Solid Snakes.
Well,
Just like there's-
because there literally is multiple Solid Snakes.
Yeah,
Right.
but what if the Solid Snake we thought he is
Not the
is
Solid
not
Snake.
the Solid Snake? He's just yet another clone.
Or
And
if-
there's
I was also thinking like, what if you play as fucking I don't know what the fuck is going on. What if you play as Cypher?
yeah.
What if you're Paz as Big Boss? I don't know what the fuck is going
Wouldn't
on.
it be, I'm just saying that like at this point, if you are legitimately just Big Boss through the entire game, wouldn't it be kind of disappointing?
Not for me, but I'm sure Kojima would make
I mean,
sure
I guess because the hype's so big about it being
Well,
there
because you
being a
have that
twist.
expectation of Metal Gear Solid 2, of there being a twist. But even in Metal Gear Solid 3, which is probably the most straightforward game in the entire franchise, there's twists in that game, but they're driven by the story.
Yeah.
There are plot twists that feel very natural and feel emotionally satisfying.
You're thinking like a gameplay twist.
It could be both.
Yeah.
It could be both.
It would be really weird if it was Solid Snake, considering they spent almost the entire Metal Gear Solid 4 like fucking a snake, essentially. Like he becomes an old man. He's like
That's a conversation
kind
for
of
Metal Gear
the
Solid
worst.
4.
He's dying.
Yeah.
He's not dying. He's dying.
But I'm saying
He's
that
grumpy.
I love the
whole
possibility of the Phantom Pain with us wanting desperately to see Solid Snake again. Just like how Big Boss comes in Metal Gear Solid 4. We all wanted to see Boss again because we love Snake Eater so much.
I thought that was the whole point of Metal Gear Solid 4.
yeah.
But just like in the spirit of Metal Gear Solid 2,
Right.
it's not the Snake that we wanted.
And just like Metal Gear Solid 4, like you want Solid Snake's back. He's
old. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying is what if there's something
It's like,
that?
oh,
Yeah.
you want me to close the loop and bring back I would love it if he did that. He was like, you want Solid Snake, here's Solid Snake, but it's not quite the way you thought.
Yeah, like it was. I mean, again, just wild speculation. What if, like, halfway through the game, or like the last quarter of the game, you're a Solid Snake, voiced by David Hayter, for all we know, voiced by David Hayter, but he's like fucked up and not the way you remember him. And then like you go into a room, and then there's like 20 other Solid Snakes, all voiced by David Hayter, and you're just like, they're like expendable. You know what I mean? Like they're just cranking them out.
They just all have a confused look in their eye.
Metal Gear.
Saying Metal Gear. That would be really interesting, especially since I don't know if this really actually works, but like Snake's, I mean, obviously he has accelerated aging, so they could accelerate him to the age of which he looked like Big Boss.
Right.
I mean,
And
it
then
could be
he
anything.
could, and then just fucking slap a horn on him.
Well, it could even
and an
be.
eye
It could
patch.
even be like Solid Snake. We assume this character is Solid Snake because we were told that he was Solid Snake. But what if just like there's that theory that James Bond is the code name? What if there's multiple Solid Snakes?
Right.
I mean, I
think that makes sense.
I don't necessarily.
The whole fucking series is about clones.
Yeah,
No,
I don't necessarily believe any of this.
Right,
I'm just.
it's interesting. You know?
I'm saying that's why, to bring it all full circle, to bring it home, people. That's why I love Metal Gear Solid 2. And that's why I think that it stands out from the series because it is willing to make these leaps and to do fucking crazy banana shit that no one else does. And it makes us believe in Kojima.
Yeah.
It shows us that all bets are off. He's the original video game troll. You know what I mean? Like he can do anything that he wants.
And I think that he's still perfectly talented and in his prime, despite how many years he's been working. I mean, Silent Hills was
Fantastic.
Like what we saw of it.
You mean PT? 'Cause we're never going to see Silent Hills.
PT.
Yeah.
Was beautiful, wonderful, like
it was a glimpse
unique,
of like
everything that.
And we're never
going
to know what it's going to mean. Like we never know what any of that means.
It wasn't it was a confirmation of like, no, this we always thought this dude knew what he was fucking doing with game design, but this dude really knows what the fuck he's doing with game design. He's not just a Metal Gear Solid machine. He also knows how to do other things because he knows and understands the medium.
Mm-hmm. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise that he's finally rid of the curse of Metal Gear. As sad as that is to us, maybe it's time to see a new Kojima thing.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Totally okay with that.
I was so excited, Silent Hills, and but it's also weird because that's another franchise that he was supposedly saving. Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm a Silent Hill fan. So that was like the fact that we had Kojima coming on there. It was like, the chosen one was a savior. Yeah. But it would be great to see what he does next. Mm-hmm. It might be another Zone of the Enders for all we know.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said, it's proof that he can do great things, and no matter what, he has my benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like no matter what, he was
never a one-trick pony, and anybody that thought that was a fool.
But Josh, I mean, you don't like Metal Gear Solid 4, and you're not shy about that. You're very vocal that you don't like Metal Gear Solid 4. But I think
it's not for gameplay reasons though, or design reasons. It's the story and what it tries to do. Yeah.
But I think because Metal Gear Solid 2 was such a great game and followed up by Snake Eater, you are so you could have given up on the franchise, but you're more passionate about Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain than anyone that I know. Mm-hmm. And that you hated the game that came before those, you know? So that just shows how strong of a storyteller and how much you believe in Kojima.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we can take away from this, is that regardless of what you feel about the gameplay or even the story of Metal Gear Solid 2, is that the ambition behind it, what it has to say, makes it unique, not just in a video game, but just any sort of artistic medium for what it's trying to do within its version of storytelling of being a video game, embracing the fact that it's a video game, and it makes us want to listen to what else this guy has to say.
Absolutely.
All right, so I think that wraps up. Unless we have any other follow-up thoughts, I think we well explored Metal Gear Solid 2, because right now I think we're at an hour and a half.
Jesus.
For this.
I do want to tell you guys that I'm going to invade your bases and I'm going to take things.
God damn it, Josh.
And you won't see me coming because I'm very sneaky.
I'm going to have so many fucking Gatling guns set up around my base just to get you.
I will Fulton them all.
You bastard.
And anybody listening, I'll be invading your base too.
Yeah, I was going to say we're going to have to think about this, but I was kind of toying with the idea of having a 3-player base that we could all cooperate on and have anyone interested invade us.
And then I'll see everybody in MGO, and I'm going to beat you there too.
Yeah, right. But without more of this sort of conversation to follow. So this is just wrapping up Metal Gear Solid 2, and we're going to say more of this in other places, but I'm going to use this opportunity to say, everyone who has stuck around for Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2, we absolutely adore you. We started the series not knowing if anyone was going to be interested in what we have to say, and the fact that you humor us at all, we find it so wonderful. And especially when people engage us, share their stories with us, share their thoughts, that's why we're doing this. And I would say, on my part, I have to apologize because we are only Metal Gear Solid 2. I mean, this whole thing started off as a countdown to the Phantom Pain, and we're only on Metal Gear Solid 2. And some of that was outside of our control because life happens, and it's hard to get together and produce something that is of quality. And that's what we always strive for, is to do the best that we can and not just upload crap. And that's why it's taken us so long. And also that we have so much to say.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have sped through so much of this game just dead silence. But that's not why we're doing this. We want to talk about it. Because of that, this version of our Metal Gear year is kind of coming to a close. Because it originally started off as a countdown to the Phantom Pain. And by the time you guys are listening to this, the Phantom Pain is going to be out. So normally that would be the end of our Metal Gear year. It didn't turn out the way we thought it would, just kind of like Metal Gear Solid 2. Huh. But we're not going to give up on that. I mean, I feel like we just fucking tore into Metal Gear Solid 2, and we still have so much to talk about. We still have Snake Eater, Peace Walker, the Phantom Pain eventually, and if we have time, maybe we'll get into some of the other games.
And
Rising.
Guns of the Patriots.
Maybe. We'll do Josh a favor and skip over 4. Uh-huh. So what I'm essentially saying is that thank you guys for following me this much, and we so appreciate it. And like, you have no idea how much we enjoy doing this thing. But because of the nature of how the show has evolved and how it's happened, because the Phantom Pain is coming out, it has already come out. As fans, we're first and foremost fans more than anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to play that fucking game, guys. We're going to play the Phantom Pain. And when I say we're going to play it, we're not going to like slap it on the screen and just scream. You know, like we want to enjoy it because we're fans.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is probably the last Kojima Metal Gear we're going to get. And if it is, I want it to be a very personal, like the best experience I can get. I want to go into it fully, like thoroughly enjoy the thing before.
You don't want to be playing it wondering what people are watching or thinking.
Right.
Yeah, we're not doing this to be performers. We're doing this because we like the conversation. So we're going to take some time off. We're going to take a little break and we're going to play the Phantom Pain. So we're going to have another video explaining all this very concisely and very short. You don't have to wait an hour and a half to get to that point. But this is our Metal Gear year. We're going to take a break. We're not going anywhere. We're going to come back, and we're going to come back with Snake Eater. And I'm going to have to hint at something. When we come back with Snake Eater, things might be a little different. We might be on a different channel. We might have slightly different production values, but things are going to be very exciting. So when we come back, we're going to do justice to Snake Eater. We're going to do justice to Metal Gear Solid 4. And man, when it comes, we are going to do the Phantom Pain. But when we're going to do it, it's not going to be rushed. It's not going to be just to get it onto screen. We're going to do it the same way that we did Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2. We're going to take our time, and we're really going to talk about it. Let's just hope it doesn't take as long for us to do it.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to give a special thanks to Justin, because none of this would have been possible without you. And none of it would have, I fully believe that none of it would have happened. And we wouldn't be here without Justin, because he's done so much of the directing, producing, organizing, and editing. Essentially, he is the show.
So direct all complaints towards me.
No. And he's our social media manager. He does everything. Me and Josh just show up and talk.
Yeah, play games.
So I wanted to give a special, very, very special thanks to Justin, who is the only reason that we exist. And
like you don't exist on the planet.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, if you're thanking me,
yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you thank you. Just thank you. But if you're thanking me for doing all this, I would have to thank you, Dora, for having me play Metal Gear Solid 1 in the first place. So it all comes back to you. And then Josh, for engaging me in conversation and say, fuck, this is a game that is good enough to talk about and do it on this level. So this show wouldn't exist without you two guys. I wouldn't do it with anyone else. So everyone listening at home, thank you if you've listened to this, thank you.
Yeah, right.
I really appreciate it. I personally had a lot of fun. I love doing this. This is fun for me. This is why I do the shows, because I think it's fun. I hope you guys think it's fun too. And by all means, this is our opinion. If you have more thoughts, if you want to tell us your interpretations, if you think why we're full of bullshit, but don't just call us, assholes and just leave it at that. Tell us why. Tell us why we're wrong. Share your thoughts and opinions with us. Leave it in the comments. Send us. You can send us an email to x3playergaming@gmail.com. You can do that. But thank you all for listening to this and putting up with us. And we'll hope to see a lot more of you in the future. So this is Justin signing off, saying thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
See ya.